Welcome back to another episode of LEO Radio. I'm joined with my partner, Collin Congleton. I'm Joey Sperlazza. We're continuing our leadership series. We're breaking down Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. We're continuing with Discipline Equals Freedom, the Dichotomy of Leadership.
Yeah, so this is the last section of the book, and this is a concept that they explore much more in depth in the follow-up to this book, which is called the Dichotomy of Leadership. So this is basically where they talk about the interesting, seemingly conflicting things within the many principles that they discuss throughout the book, and how we have to find a balance between these seemingly conflicting ideas. So I'm going to start off with a quote from the book and then get into the principles here. So, while increased discipline most often results in more freedom, there are some teams that become so restricted by imposed discipline that they inhibit their leaders' and teams' ability to make decisions and think freely. If frontline leaders and troops executing the mission lack the ability to adapt, this becomes detrimental to the team's performance. So the balance between discipline and freedom must be found and carefully maintained. In that lies the dichotomy. Discipline, strict order, regimen, and control might appear to be the opposite of total freedom, the power to act, speak, or think without any restrictions. But in fact, discipline is the pathway to freedom. Interesting, really interesting idea there. And they explore this in depth in a couple of his podcast episodes, which I really enjoyed. He talks about, for example, fitness and how he can apply this idea to fitness, right? And having the rigid discipline to get up at 4:30 in the morning and work out and train jujitsu and all that takes a lot of discipline. It is a strict regimen and diet control and all that kind of stuff. But then the freedom that gives him in other aspects of his life, right? So in any event, they talk about in the next few principles that we're going to break down how to really apply this as a leader. So the first one, every leader must walk a fine line. That's what makes leadership so challenging. Just as discipline and freedom are opposing forces that must be balanced, leadership requires finding the equilibrium in the dichotomy of many seemingly contradictory qualities between one extreme and another. Yeah, this
So,
is
especially looking at the discipline aspect of it, I mean, you and I were just talking offline about our case law class, right? I didn't learn case law by reading a case. I didn't read a case law, understand case law by attending one class. It was a series of classes. It was a ton of reading. It was a ton of dissecting and comparing cases, comparing fact patterns, trying to understand what a Supreme Court justice was thinking at that moment when I don't have that level of education. I know you went to law school, but I did not. But without that education, trying to train myself, do the reading, have that understanding, it takes a lot of discipline. The more of that discipline you have in training, the more of that discipline you have in the gym, in the classroom, etc. It's not, no one goes to the gym for a day and becomes in shape. It's not a light switch that you flip on and off. And it's the same with this type of training. When you're disciplined in that sense, your decision making becomes second nature. The more you're mentally prepared, physically prepared for the tasks that we have at hand. And you can't do one without the other because you have to be the total package as a police officer. We have to have the education of a lawyer, the defensive tactics of a jujitsu master in MMA. We have to be a sharpshooter, the same as a sniper. Those are a lot of different skill sets that don't necessarily run parallel with each other. So, given that we have so many disciplines, you have to be understanding and well versed in all of them. You have to be that jack of all trades. And if you don't have that discipline, you're not going to do well in the execution of your tasks. And the more so that you're trained, and everything to me comes down to that training, the better you're going to be at executing that ultimate task. And for you as a leader, just what you said, what makes that leadership, that is what makes that leadership so challenging. It is a very fine line, being able to balance all of that, especially when you're empowering junior people on your squad within your organization to make a decision and removing yourself, checking your ego.
Yeah, the last thing I would add to this, you as a good leader, you should be recognizing these contradictory concepts and constantly striving to find that balance, right? One that comes to mind, for example, one of the difficult parts of the job, I think, as a leader is, for me at least, is being the disciplinarian. Some people enjoy or embrace that more than others, but that wasn't really something I was looking to do. But it's critical. You have to have good order and discipline within the unit if you're going to be effective, especially in a paramilitary organization like law enforcement, right? So, you know, you have to instill that discipline in your people. At the same time, to be a good leader, you've got to be compassionate. You've got to be a human being. You can't be that stern, strict, hard ass all the time. You've got to be a person and recognize that the people you're dealing with are human beings as well, and balance that strict nature, that discipline with compassion as a leader. Be that person that they can trust and come to and talk to. That definitely is a tough line to walk, and that's just one example of many.
For me, to piggyback off of what you said, um, I think it's very easy to discipline, counsel, or coach people that are emotionally vested in their profession and their job. You know that it was just a mistake of the mind. Their heart was in the right place. They wanted to do the right thing. They just made a mistake. And I'll have that conversation all day, every day, sometimes in a very stern parental tone. Um, Maybe that tone of disappointment. Where I've always had the difficulty is dealing with the frustration of somebody that has the appearance of just not caring, the appearance
Mhm.
of saying, I'm just here for my paycheck. I'm here to do my 40 hours a week and go home. I'm only here because this is what pays my bills. That person is so frustrating. And that person is the most difficult person to deal with in law enforcement, in my opinion. How do you get through to somebody that's emotionally checked out? And maybe some of them you can understand. Maybe they've been hit with an IA that was, in their mind, unjust. And maybe you even agree with them in saying that it was unjust or improper. Maybe they were removed from a specialized unit and they feel that they shouldn't have been. Now they're back in patrol and they don't want to come back to patrol. They're viewing that as being a punishment. Like, how do you get through to that person? Um, I could deal with the person who thinks that they were kind of wrong, but that person that genuinely doesn't care, it winds up being that for the benefit of the profession, the public, and your department, sometimes it has to be that you go at them with a very objective, stern approach on everything that they do wrong. And it has to be that formal discipline, that formal write up. And I don't like doing that. I hate it, to be honest with you. I wish I could just pick and choose the people that were on my team, but unfortunately in patrol, that's not the nature. And again, I don't mean to divert too much from what we're talking about. I know we said we could do a whole episode just on this, but it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about here.
It really does, and you touch on something too that I think is really, really critical for leaders to understand, and that is that treating people fairly does not mean treating them the same, right? And that's something, this isn't fair. He got that and I didn't, or he messed up and you handled it this way. Now I messed up and you're handling it differently. Well, you know, we don't treat everybody the same because they're not the same. Your officers are not, again, they're human beings, right? They're not robots. They're not all the same. And so recognizing that and recognizing that, hey, I might need to take a different approach with this guy versus that guy, or the circumstances are different, right? I'm weighing everything out, trying to be objective and considering all the facts and circumstances when I evaluate, what happened, what an officer did, what are they dealing with? And maybe not everybody's going to be privy to all those details. Maybe it's none of their business. Um, the bottom line is you have to be you have to accept that reality and be willing to stand by your decisions and help other people learn that truth, that treating people fairly does not mean treating them all the same.
And especially when it comes to people not getting some sort of a specialized assignment, especially when in their view they were the most qualified person for that position. Uh, it reminds me of that Jocko clip where he just says "good." You're, you've seen that,
Yeah,
right? It's like we didn't get the new cars. Good. These cars are broken and uncomfortable. I
that
didn't
was
get
the
I didn't
screensaver on my cell phone for a long
I
time.
didn't I
Good.
didn't get that position. Good. You have more time to perfect patrol. Good. You have more time to attend training. So when you do get that position, you're better prepared for it and you'll be the
Or
best.
there's a better opportunity coming that's going to turn out to be better for you than you had
Exactly.
realized.
And I've been passed up. I'm sure you've been passed up
Oh
before.
yeah.
And it sucks. When you're in that moment, it sucks. But I can get that person out of that rut. And sometimes it's again just that rudder tap, put them back on mission, get them past that, kind of embrace the conversation, have that conversation, and then come up with their plan. How do you recover from it? Because guess what? It's over. Now we have to move forward, go forward. Good. We get to spend more time. You get to have more time on this squad that you love to work with. And
I
uh,
I wanted desperately to go to our emergency services unit for a long time, and I was told from the day I got on the job, like, "Hey, that's where you belong. You're gonna go there someday." And for those listening who maybe are not familiar with that, it's an interesting concept. Jersey City's ESU actually pre-exists NYPD's, but very similar roles. Emergency services is kind of a SWAT rescue. They do bomb stuff, they do waterborne stuff, high angle rescue. We got a lot of bridges and tunnels and all that around here. So they do all sorts of things, responding to car accidents, medical calls, EDPs, you name it, right? Like their saying is when people need help, they call the police. When police need help, they call ESU, right? So I really, really was aspiring to be a part of that unit for a long time. And for a number of reasons, I got passed, and I felt like I really got screwed. I was not happy with that. I thought it was unjust and unfair, and so on and so forth. But I had the discipline to stay on my course and say, I'm not going to let that affect how I operate. I'm going to continue to show up to work every day, do my job, gonna keep shining my boots, polishing my brass. I'm gonna be squared away. Uh, and in the end, it ended up really working out because had I gone to ESU, I likely never would have pursued law school. There were other things that I ended up doing because I wasn't there that in the long run worked out so much better for me. And because I applied that discipline to myself and my professional development, other doors opened up for me down the road. And, you know, don't tell anybody at my agency, right? Because that's if anybody knows how happy you are, they'll take it away, right? Uh, I honestly believe the best job in my agency. I mean, I literally created my own job, wrote the policies and everything, started this use of force unit from scratch, got to pick my guys. Uh, just every day I get to come to work. I do something that I love that is putting me in a great position for after this career with guys that I regard as some of the best cops in my agency, uh, doing work that is meaningful. We have a ton of flexibility and freedom in our day to day. It's tremendous. I never could have even imagined being in a role like this. And had I gotten what I wanted, I wouldn't be. So
and you're obviously a training mindset person. Imagine if your position went towards a discipline minded person rather than a retraining minded person.
yeah,
So having that right person in the role, and it's not
yeah,
that not every issue with the use of force has to go to the root of discipline. A lot of it
right.
has to do with retraining. And the more that you point improper, not improper, but um, the more that you have a use of force incident that could have been handled in an alternative way that would have potentially had a better outcome. It's not necessarily that the route that they chose was improper. Maybe they didn't realize that route A, B, and C existed. They chose route A because they only knew route A.
Like
Because
you said before, was it a failure of the mind or a failure of the heart? I really
yeah,
like that. I think that's a great way to look at it. And yeah, we'll look to that. And oftentimes what we find is that we as an organization or as a profession failed that officer. That officer wasn't given the training that they needed to be successful in that situation. And now we're holding them to
that's a
very
very
high standard.
powerful twist into a very complex issue. And when
Yeah,
that twist is again with the officer's well-being and both mentally, physically, and even financially, these when you're presenting them with options, showing them these are all the options that we could have used. And I love that you guys break down specific incidents and tell them other ways that that exact incident that they lived in real life could have been handled in different ways. And that's going to be well received compared to getting a letter in your file saying, I shouldn't have OC'd this person. Well, you
yeah.
shouldn't have OC'd this person because of the fact that this guy no longer had a knife in his hand and this guy no longer was an imminent threat to your safety. The second he dropped that knife, he became a passive resistor. Did you understand how he changed in that dynamic?
Yeah.
If not, it's a training issue and it's a failure on the department, especially when it comes to use of force, when that was such a drastic change within the last 2 years and is contrary to a lot of what we've been trained for the last 30 plus years in law enforcement. So
Yep.
it's
And
important to
I can't even
recognize.
tell you how much we've had guys come in where we've said, "Hey, listen, unfortunately, this is a policy violation here, right? It is what it is. Here's why. We're going to discuss it, and we're going to our view of this is that it's a relatively minor policy violation, and we're going to give you some training. We're going to break this down. We're going to talk about it, piece by piece. We're going to give you some tools that are going to make you better equipped to handle something like this next time it comes up. You don't have to necessarily take that disciplinarian approach. And man, it is so well received. And we've had so many guys come in where it could have been a negative thing. And they're walking out the door saying, boss, thank you so much. This is some of the best training I've had since the academy. I wish I'd gotten something like this sooner. So that there's a lot of there's a lot of power in that. And again, going back to this, the dichotomy there, right? Like uh as a leader, recognizing, hey, there's a discipline component to this, but it it doesn't have to be a negative experience. We can get something positive out of this,
Well,
and it's
discipline
very
is
powerful.
closely related in an officer's mind to internal affairs. But the reality is discipline is what he's talking about here. It's the having the wherewithal to train, having the wherewithal to be up at 4:30 in the morning to be in the gym. That's
Yeah.
discipline. Discipline isn't serving a day in the street because you pepper sprayed somebody that you should have used a takedown on, physical force, or like those two words, though they are the same word, that discipline is different. And unfortunately, in the mind of a police officer, discipline is viewed as negative. But when the discipline is being rerouted to retraining, and when we have to do meaningful reviews on all of our use of force, that's one of the options that we have there to check off recommended retraining. And I've done that with officers, and it's been well received by those officers. They appreciate it because it shows that you're emotionally and physically invested in their development. Because the better that they're developed, easier my job is. Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next point here.
Yeah.
A leader must lead, but also be ready to follow. Sometimes another member of the team, perhaps a subordinate or direct report, might be in a better position to develop a plan, make a decision, or lead through a specific situation. Perhaps the junior has greater expertise in a particular area or more expertise. Good leaders must welcome this, putting aside ego and agendas to assure that the team has the greatest chance of accomplishing its strategic goals. What a loaded statement.
Here, yet again, we see the issue of ego coming into play. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, and in our profession especially, I think it's one of the number one issues, and for leaders in particular. So, putting the mission and your people first, and putting your ego aside, And recognizing, again, tying this into the overarching theme of this last section, the various dichotomies, right? Sometimes as a leader, you got to be willing to follow. And that's going to take some humility. It's being able to objectively analyze the situation, know your people, know the talent that you have there in your team, and put them in a position where they're going to make the team successful, right? Putting the team and the mission first. Uh, this is something that, man, I wish we saw more of this. But the shiny stuff on your collar does not make you an expert, And if you legitimately are an expert at something, great. By all means, when the situation calls for it, if that's your time to shine, have at it. And I know some guys. We got a deputy chief who's a hostage and crisis negotiator. Um, Great that he has that skill set and that experience. At the same time, you might want to recognize that, hey, I'm a whatever deputy chief, captain, lieutenant. Uh, the the more appropriate role for me to fill in this particular situation is that of incident command. Because we have another young cop here that has that hostage and crisis training, and he doesn't have the command experience. So as much as I may want to step into that negotiator role and be the superstar in that incident, maybe it's better for me to step aside, let that young cop step up, give them an opportunity to shine, and I fulfill a different role that's going to make the team more successful and is going to put the mission first.
And he talks in here too about agendas, which is interesting too, right? It's like if you feel the need to take credit for your team's work, if you feel the need to belittle a subordinate, or more importantly, even belittle a junior officer that made a mistake of the mind, what's your agenda? What's the end goal? What's the end state? Um, because going back to the overarching concept of this book, extreme ownership, if your subordinate failed, you failed. You failed in your supervision, you failed in your training, you failed in the overall mission of the department, right? And the execution of that mission. But
Yeah.
again, what's the agenda? Our agenda should be to accomplish our mission safely, get everybody home, and develop people while we get there. Again, I'm currently a lieutenant. If somebody that's currently one of my subordinates eventually becomes one of my captains, good for him. I want them to do that. I want them to develop. And I've mentioned this before. I have officers that have gotten into specialized unit. The unit I wanted the most was the anti-crime unit. And I unfortunately got passed up. And what I did is I decided to take promotions very seriously to control my own fate here. And now I've trained other officers to get into that position. They are currently in that position. I'm so proud of these guys because it's what they want. It's what they worked very hard for. Like what's your agenda? Like your agenda should be accomplish the mission, do it safely, and develop the people that are around you. To me, the development of subordinates is the absolute most rewarding part of being a supervisor. It's not wearing a pretty white shirt. It's not having rank. It's not being able to command people around. It's being able to look back and see people that you trained doing something that you trained them to do. Like when I could predict the next question that's going to be asked during a field interview, I'm like, I taught you that. Like I knew where you were going with that line of questioning because we've done this before together,
I
Watching.
unfortunately can't recall where it comes from, but I heard a line a while back, and it ties perfectly to what you're talking about here. And I really have held on to it. And basically, it's that one of the marks of a great leader is how many leaders they create, right? If and exactly what you're talking about, developing your subordinates, developing your people, and turning them into leaders, and hoping for their success, even if that means they surpass you. That's fantastic. And many of us, when we leave the job, uh, there's no legacy. You might have your walkout or whatever, and the very next day you might be forgotten about, like literally the next day, right? That machine keeps on moving, and Yes, you see some guys hang on too long. "Oh, I can't leave. This place will fall apart without me." No, no, not the case. If you really want to have a legacy, though, you focus on developing other leaders, and your impact on that agency will be felt long after you're gone, in a positive way.
And those people that you impacted are the ones that are going to talk about you. It's not the fact that you started the unit. It's about how you treated people when you were in that unit, about how you developed the guys that are underneath you, and it's about how that unit runs when you leave. Because if you were to retire today and move on to another career, if that unit is able to move on as if nothing was interrupted, that in and of itself is your success. And
Yeah.
I talk about this in my command one. There's actually a clip that is on our social media of me talking about exactly what you just said. There's literally a list of people that are waiting to replace you in law enforcement.
Yeah.
There is a running list of new hires that are ready to replace you at the rank of police officer, sergeant list, lieutenant list, captain list, etc. They're ready. They're waiting for you to get out of the seat so that they could get into it. So
A lot of times they might not even be waiting for you to retire. They're trying to figure out how to get your ass out of that seat.
they're trying to tip the chair over. But all right, so we're getting towards the end of this book here. The Dichotomy of Leadership. A good leader must be confident but not cocky. There's a whole list here, but I think that that one's worth just reflecting on
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah,
That
man.
is such a distinct difference, right? And it reminds me of a Jadakiss line. I'm not cocky, I'm confident. So when you tell me I'm the best, it's a compliment. But but truthfully, I mean, there's a very big difference between confident in your answers and being cocky. When you're cocky, your response is viewed as you being a smart aleck or you trying to be dissentful or trying to be insubordinate. When you're confident in your answer, you give objective reasons to support your answer, like you're presenting it like it's a case study. It's a very easy to get your point across. And that goes hand in hand with leading up the chain of command that we talked about in previous episodes. Presenting your plan with confidence
Yeah.
is very important. Don't be cocky, be confident.
I think there's oftentimes a very fine line between these two. And I think that sometimes people who lack confidence will perceive people who are confident as being cocky. Uh, and that's okay. What I think this boils down to is confidence is quiet, right? And the cocky person, the arrogant person, is doing things with the intention of stroking their ego and getting the recognition, all that kind of stuff. It's loud. It's flamboyant. It's telling everybody how good you are, how great you are. When you are confident, you don't have to do any of that stuff. And I'm not going to give it away yet, but the one of the very last bullet points here ties directly to this. Um, you don't have to go around telling everybody how good you are. If you're actually that good, they're going to know it by your actions. And so that's what I mean when I say confidence is quiet. Uh, you don't have to talk about it, be about it. Let your actions speak for you and show everybody that you're a competent professional, you know?
And it's true too that cockiness and arrogance, people at first might believe you, especially if it's a junior officer that doesn't know you yet, but that facade will eventually dissipate and your true colors are going to come out. If it shows that your cockiness was false, again, another very difficult, if not impossible thing to come back from.
Yeah.
Checking your ego goes hand in hand with not being cocky, not being overly arrogant, right? All right, so next, courageous but not foolhardy. Goes hand in hand with everything he's talked about with planning, right? You're going to be confident, you're going to be courageous, but don't be foolhardy. Know what your risks are, know what you can do to mitigate the risks, and also recognize what potential unknown risks can be.
I think of Captain Sobel from Band of Brothers. right? And running when they were in training in England when they first got in theater, and he runs his unit into an ambush in the woods, right? In that training exercise. Uh, Somebody who lacked true confidence, and because of that, and because he felt he needed to prove himself, and he was driven by ego, made foolhardy decisions because he wanted to appear courageous. So, uh, you know, here again, there could be a fine line, but um, the one thing I'll say with courage, I just want to add a little bit to this because when I teach at the academy and I have the opportunity, the privilege to um, try to influence our incoming young new officers. One of the things that I have told every class that I've taught over the years is there's only two things you can't uh, recover from in this profession. One is being a liar or sacrificing your integrity, and two is being a coward. So courage to me in this profession is of the utmost importance. For leaders, it is just that much more important. And so and I will talk about the different types of courage, right? Physical courage, running into a burning building, running towards gunfire, and moral courage, making hard decisions, even when you think nobody's looking or paying attention, doing the right thing. Um, the thing that I try to get them to understand about courage is it it is a habit that you can develop. You can, people talk about a lot of times when it comes to this, it's something you're born with or you're not. Some people are naturally more courageous than others. That may be true to an extent, but I think, at least in my case, and this isn't to say that I'm a highly courageous person, but if I were being honest with myself, I could say that over my 21 years on the job and multiple combat deployments and all those different experiences, I've been in situations that required some courage, and I didn't fail myself or my team in those situations. Take that for whatever it is. I think in hindsight that I was able to be successful in those situations because I tried to practice courage in smaller ways over time. And so when it came to the the big tests, I was prepared for that. And there's also my last thing with this, and I apologize, but again, I think it's really important. Um, I had the opportunity to train with a company called Northern Red, a bunch of former Delta guys. Phenomenal training. And this guy, Zach Harris, former Delta operator, one of the most impressive human beings I've ever encountered. And such a privilege to train with this guy. And we had a discussion about this very issue at the end of the class. And he talked about something that I had never contemplated deliberately, but it occurred to me that it was something I had done maybe unknowingly, and now it's something that I try to teach to others to help them with this, and that's the value of pre-made decisions and how that has helped guys up to the most elite levels, Delta Force, um, to be successful in situations that required courage. And what he means by that is, if you're if you make certain decisions ahead of time, then you don't have to grapple with the decision in the moment. And so maybe it's not even so much being courageous, but simply you made a decision a long time ago when you weren't under stress and faced with fear, that you were going to commit to a certain course of action, right? And so, for example, what am I going to do if a grenade lands in on this rooftop, with me and my partner here, and that pre-made decision that, I got to cover it, and we've seen that happen in combat. And Kyle Carpenter, talking about how they discussed that very situation before it happened, and that was a pre-made decision. So when he found himself in that situation, he was able to act immediately and do the courageous thing because he'd already made up his mind to do it. That can be a very powerful thing. And so if you consider as a cop, as a law enforcement professional, as a leader, if you're deliberate about considering the different situations you may encounter, that you may find yourself in, the different difficult situations that you're going to be up against, and you really give those things thought and make decisions ahead of time, you're preparing yourself to be successful and exercise courage in the moment, where you don't have to grapple with the fear and the what if and all of those things in the moment, because you made that decision a long time ago.
And I truly think that courage is built by confidence. Confidence is built by training. You have the courage to take on somebody that's an armed adversary because of the fact that you're confident in your ability to overcome their force.
Great point. Yeah.
You have that confidence because of how well you've trained for that moment. It's everything's a building block on top of one another. And I
Yeah.
mean, putting that together to everything that you said, it's you're going to get more courage. Fear is very real. And don't think for a second that when the bell rings, you're going to have zero fear. That
Yeah.
fear is going to overcome you. And truthfully, in some of the instances that I've handled, sometimes you don't realize the fear until well afterwards, and you don't realize how much you just faced a life or death
Oh
situation.
yeah. Yeah.
And when you reflect back, that fear will set in. It might not set in at that moment, but how you overcome that fear in that moment is your courage built on confidence and
Right.
training.
Right. And to be clear, yeah, we're not suggesting that courage is the absence of fear. It's quite the opposite. And this is
Absolutely.
yet another dichotomy, right? Like, if there was no fear, there would be no need for courage.
Hmm.
Courage is not being unafraid. It's that you are afraid and you're doing what needs to be done anyway. You're overcoming that fear. You're putting that fear aside and putting the mission or your people first, and doing what needs to be done in spite of the fear.
All right. So on to the next. Competitive but a gracious loser. I think that that's such an important thing that's learned at a very young age, and hopefully it's not something that's being lost with the in the age of participation trophies. But
Yeah, here
going back
again.
to what Jocko said about good, right? It's like when you lost, good. You just got your reality check. Stay competitive. How do you get better? When you're undefeated, you become complacent. Like why did the like to go back to Patriots analogy, and I'm not a Patriots fan, but why did they lose in the Super Bowl to the New York Giants? Was it complacency? Was it because they were so used to winning that they just thought they were going to walk through the Super Bowl, the biggest stage that they're going to face that year? I would say complacency had to do something with them losing in that stage, but you have to be competitive, and sometimes that loss leads to future wins. It only becomes
It,
future wins if you recover from it and retrain and recognize those mistakes that were made.
yeah, and if you're going to be a good leader, you should be driven. You should be competitive. I want to be the best at what I do. I want the team that I'm leading to be the best performing team. I want my people to be the best that they can. That's being competitive, right? But then checking the ego and being gracious when you lose, and understand that, this one of the sayings in jujitsu that I really love is I don't lose, I learn. And man, I learn a lot.
Yep.
You take those lessons with the losses and you get better and you move on.
Yep. All right. Attentive to details, but not obsessed by them. I don't know what else we could add to what we've already beat to death on
This
that.
is just, attention to detail is critical. And, I mean, that's something I think Marines, it's one of the things that we're known for is that strict attention to detail. It can be a very valuable thing, but you can't get lost in the weeds, especially as a leader, and especially the higher up you go in an organization. You got to have perspective. We talked about this in one of the earlier episodes, the importance of perspective, being detached and decentralized command. If you're hyper focused on the details as a leader, and especially as a senior level leader, you're not positioned to be successful. You've got to be a big picture guy. So
Y-
pushing down that attention to detail to the subordinates and letting them worry about the details at their level.
y-
You worry about the big picture stuff.
Yeah, and I look at that as being use the details to your advantage. Don't let them become a hindrance. When you're obsessed with them, they're a hindrance to your ability to accomplish the mission.
Yeah, that's
Right?
going to create that paralysis we were talking about before.
Absolutely. Strong but have endurance. Anyone that has ever lifted weights can relate to this, right? You gave it your all on the first shot, and you have absolutely nothing left in the tank. But I mean, especially, and you can relate this back to our entire career. Nothing in this career is a sprint. There's moments where you have to sprint. Well, when you're sprinting too much, you're not going to have the longevity to last in this career. Ties into everything we've talked about with training, with having your mental well-being intact.
So glad you said that. That's exactly where my mind was going with this particular bullet point. Um, we value strength in this profession, uh, sometimes to our own detriment, and recognizing that this career is a marathon, not a sprint. Depending on where you're working, 20 years. For us in Jersey, 25 years now. For the newer guys coming in, it's 30. You're looking to survive a career of 25 to 30 years. Most people in their lifetime will experience maybe 4 or 5 incidents that qualify as a traumatic incident, right? The average cop is going to experience between 4 and 500 of those incidents over the course of their career, 25 to 30 years. You got to be strong. You got to be mentally tough and all that stuff. That absolutely it's important, but you gotta have that endurance to make it to the finish line, and that means you got to take care of yourself. Uh you gotta take care of your heart and your soul, and your mental and emotional well-being. It's critical. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. We could spend a whole episode on that, and maybe we will at some point. But yeah,
I think it's
certainly.
good that with the push of EAP and how much a lot of the stigmatism about counseling has been removed, the fact that it's generally more accepted in society to talk to a psychologist, a trained professional, but also they've talked a lot about peer counselors, and that's why you have resiliency officers. And even if
Yeah,
it's not a resiliency officer, really the heart of a peer counselor is having somebody with similar life experiences that went through a similar traumatic event for you to be able to sit there and talk to that individual, to have the heart to open up to that individual and know you're not going to be judged. Know that
yeah,
you can get this off of your chest. Know that you could be honest with people in that setting, because the last thing that you want to do is feel that you're entering into this because you're forced to do so. And we were just talking about the officer involved shootings. Like, part of the officer involved shootings, you have to go to a psychological evaluation. That psychological evaluation in that setting could feel forced, and it could be the difference of you coming back to work or not. There has to be something separate from that formal evaluation that's going to allow you to truly open up and express yourself freely and be able to get something that's a traumatic incident off of your chest.
yeah. And one other point I'll make on that as well is there's some studies coming out now that are pointing to what is referred to as cumulative PTSD, something that a lot of us had kind of had a sense of this before, but now they're formally recognizing it and researching it. And basically, what it boils down to is we talk about certain particular critical incidents on the job and how that may um, affect somebody. With this concept, they're talking about the cumulative effect of years of incidents that maybe none of those individual incidents were going to result in some level of PTSD. Take, for example, car accidents, right? Um, Maybe there wasn't one particular accident that was so horrible that it gave an officer a lot of problems. But over the years, the effect of responding to several hundred accidents and seeing some of the terrible things that we encountered there, maybe with children involved and so on, and
I
how
had one of my coworkers exactly that. It was like back-to-back weeks where he responded to fatals where an individual was struck and children. And after that one, you could see it in his face. And to the point where he's like, I don't think I could do another one of these. And
Yeah.
it's like you said, the individual event is traumatic enough, but now you have that combined, and especially
Yes.
when you're a parent and you're seeing the death of somebody that you can relate to your own child.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
all human. It's like
Yep.
seeing that type of stuff. It's
Each
absolutely
of those is
wrenching and
is a
heart-wrenching.
weight, a burden on the officer, and
It's going to exponentially grow as it compounds.
yeah, the combined weight, the combined burden of these things over time can get to be too much. And this again is, when we talk about endurance, right? Uh, uh, it comes into play directly with this. And in order for us to be able to endure over time, we've got to be able to shed some of that burden. And sometimes the best way to do that is through peer counseling. And the last thing I'll throw out on this bullet point is that I did personally struggle with some of the stuff that I experienced overseas in Iraq, and I did seek out counseling, and I did get better. And not only did I get better personally, but that experience of going through that counseling and doing that hard work was so valuable to me as a leader because of some of the things that I learned through the process. It helped me to become a little bit more emotionally intelligent. It equipped me to be a better leader and a better peer for guys on the job who are dealing with some similar type issues, and just put me in a position. It gave me some tools to be a better asset and a better leader. So for anybody out there that is dealing with this kind of stuff and is perhaps concerned that, as a leader, you're worried about how it might be perceived if you go and get some help, I can tell you firsthand, it only made me a better leader for my people. So
And that's leading from the front. When people see you accepting vulnerability and showing that vulnerability, it makes them much more likely to come forward and do the same. Right. Um, Goes right into the next point. A leader and a follower. You can't be a good leader if you're not a good follower. The part of being a good follower can sometimes be questioning orders in the sense of clarifying them. Part of being a good follower can mean giving feedback to your superiors, showing that their plan isn't working. However, if you're viewed as being insubordinate as in that leadership role, it's going to be very difficult for you to get your troops to follow you.
yeah, yeah, I think we've hit on this one quite a bit throughout the series and in this recent episode. So I don't think we have to kill that one too much more. It's a very clear, simple dichotomy and a pretty straightforward concept. You gotta put it into practice.
Yep. And then humble, not passive, just like we talked about with confident, not cocky. There's a big difference between not boasting and being passive,
Yeah, so
especially when you're giving orders.
we talk a lot throughout this series about ego, right? And so the the key there, if you're checking your ego, is you're exercising humility, right? So it's absolutely critical that we be humble as leaders and as servants, as law enforcement officers. This is a critical characteristic, but understand that humble does not mean passive. Humble doesn't mean that you're going to be meek, that you're not going to speak up. And this is why he lists this as a dichotomy. You have to, yeah, we want you to be humble, but you've still got to be courageous. You've got to be confident. You've got to be competitive, and finding that balance between all those things and maintaining humility, right? And this goes hand in hand with the next one: aggressive but not overbearing. He talks a lot about default aggressive, right? Now, here again, given the times that we're operating in, I guess we have to throw out there that we're not overemphasizing being aggressive for our cops that are out there in the street. I understand that, but the reality of the job that we do is that oftentimes uh, the public is calling us to handle violence on their behalf. And so it does occasionally require aggression in the typical sense. However, when we talk about aggressive, I don't think anybody should make the mistake of thinking that we're talking solely about being physically aggressive. I think being decisive and being uh, prone to action, we'll say, is I think what they're really getting at when they say aggressive here. So you've got to be willing to make decisions, be decisive, and and have a bias towards action.
Right into the next point, quiet, not silent. My key takeaway with that is you have to listen more than you speak sometimes, especially given the appropriate audience. The more that you're talking, the less that you're listening, and also making sure that there's active listening. The more that you kind of lay back, and especially if there's a discussion, and I've done this several times with officers I work with, letting them work out a problem and just sitting back. Could I have interjected earlier? Sure. But you're also, by not speaking and not interjecting yourself, you're allowing them to do some critical thinking, letting them figure out the progress of this problem, figure out how to come to a reasonable solution, and encouraging that. But in that leadership position, sometimes the best thing you could do is just be there and listen and not really comment specifically on exactly what should be done or how it should be done.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen with this too is we've all had those bosses that they start droning on and people just stop listening. They shut down. It's like, ah, here we go again. This guy, putting on the show, and he's got to show everybody that he's in charge, right? And he loves to hear himself talk, and so on and so forth. We've all dealt with those types of leaders, right? And the reality is, very shortly after they start speaking, most people stop listening. So, you want to find that balance here where, um the other end of the spectrum, we have those leaders that they might not say a lot, but that they're paying attention, they're sharp, they're taking everything in, they're listening. And when they do speak, everybody shuts up and they listen because they know that when that guy speaks or that girl speaks, there's value in what they're saying. So, that's the one that you want to be.
Yeah, that's exactly the next bullet point, too. Calm but not robotic, logical but not devoid of emotions.
Yeah, I think about the guy on the radio in a major critical incident that is speaking calmly and clearly, who just exudes confidence and courage, versus the one who's screaming on the air over every little thing, right? The recent video of the officer involved shooting where the guy pulls up, gets out, opens the tailgate, puts his coffee down,
Yep,
takes
yep.
his fly out, right? Takes that one well-aimed shot, problem solved, and he even gets on the radio and says, "Shot fired." You know, that's the guy you want to be, right? Calm but not robotic, logical, not devoid of emotion. That is I think a perfect example.
And that's the quickest way to get a pursuit shut down, by being overly dramatic or
100%.
yelling. You hear that coming from an officer, shut it down.
Yeah.
I could show you one of my pursuits I was in where the dispatcher, she was going back and forth with me as if it was like a call for an unattended bag.
Yeah.
But that's the
Yeah.
type of person you want on the air, right? I could be guilty of this one. I'll admit openly. Close with the troops, but not so close that one becomes more important than the other, or more important than the good of the team. Not so close that they forget who is in charge. I'm very fortunate that the people I'm friends with at my job, that they respect me enough to never blur that line when the call comes out, when the situation dictates. to the point where they're calling me Lieutenant Unseen, not calling me Joey. To the point of where we have that mutual respect for one another. And truthfully, that's the reason that these guys are the people I choose to be close with, because I know I could trust them in both situations with my life, right? Like inside and outside of work. Um, but it has to be a very purposeful, deliberate action from the leader's part to make sure that they understand that. And also making sure that, especially when it comes to favorable assignments at work or things at
Yeah.
work that are perceived as being a little bit of an incentive that we can give here or there. If you're going to give it to one, make sure you're giving it to all.
Right.
There's naturally going to be people that you gravitate towards on your squad. And it's probably even more difficult in a smaller agency compared to a larger agency. I mean, I've 15 people or so on my squad any given day. So it's probably easier to be friends with one or two compared to if you're on a squad of four, being friends with only two of them. But
Yeah. This is something
you have
I
to be
think
conscious of it.
it's this is going to be much trickier for those small unit leaders or leaders in very small agencies where you know you know everybody and you're tight knit and maybe you're going to each other's houses for barbecues on the weekends and stuff. Like the the key is here again just finding and maintaining that balance, right? And just a couple of real quick examples of how I've seen this put into practice. I had a real close friend. He was my field training officer when I first came to Jersey City. He'd already been on for a number of years. After I was done with FTO, he and I actually stayed partners. We worked together for quite a while. Uh, I was in his wedding. We were very, very close. He had more time on the job. He gets promoted ahead of me. We're now currently both lieutenants, but at the time, I was a PO. He gets promoted to sergeant. Show up to work one night. Now, one of the things in our agency and many larger agencies, much like in the military, you get promoted, you'll get moved so that you're not put in a position where you have to supervise those people that you have those close personal relationships with. Uh, in this particular instance, he was working as a sergeant in the precinct where we had come up together. And I come in and, hey, good evening, Sergeant. How are you? And he's like, man, it's Mark. Why are you calling me Sergeant? I said, brother, I love you. You're one of my closest friends. But you earned that. And while we're here, I will not put you in a position where anybody else thinks that I'm going to be treated any differently. I'm going to treat you with the respect that you earned by earning that rank. And as long as we're at work, it's hey Sarge. When we're out having a beer and it's you and me, then it's hey asshole or hey Mark or whatever. But while we're here, it's going to be Sergeant. And that's just one of the ways again in which you can actually put this into practice.
And that's worth touching on for future up and coming promotees too. People that haven't necessarily made rank yet. Though you won't necessarily change as a person, you'll develop and you'll mature. It's not that you change, it's that your role and your position within the department or agency, that is what changes. And the people that are close with you will very easily recognize that and will easily submit to what is your new authority. And if you treat them the way that you treat other people, that relationship will only become strengthened. And truthfully, the people that I work with that are my subordinates that I've been friends with, and some are senior to me in the department and remained as police officers, but the respect that they give me due to my rank strengthened our relationship with one another. It didn't hinder it. And they know that I'm going to hold them accountable the same way I hold other people accountable. Us being friends isn't going to now allow them to get one over or get more over. If anything, I think that they're held to a higher regard and they won't put me in that position because
Yeah,
they also respect me. Because that's a two-way street. We treat each
yeah,
other with dignity and respect. And that's something, if you think it's going to be an issue and you're getting into a promotable position, that you need to head off and have that very difficult conversation, a candid conversation, and get ahead of that before it becomes a problem.
yeah. The one other one that I would throw out because if we're being honest, this is just part of the culture of our profession. Uh, you know, getting out to the bar after a promotion or a parade or a funeral or whatever the case may be, right? There's everybody, wherever you work, there's probably the cop bar, right? Uh, this is something to be conscious of and be cautious of as you get into a leadership role and as you ascend the ranks. Um, I had a guy now retired from my job, but he was a chief and somebody that I highly respect. And he would come out, he would show face and hey, how you doing? And this is the balance, right, of the dichotomy. He would show up, he'd have one, he'd make the rounds, and then he would take his leave, and he recognized the importance. He could not put himself in a position where he was blurring the lines, or could be seen as being too close to any one particular individual, too comfortable with anybody, and also recognizing his position and not wanting to make other people uncomfortable or feel like they couldn't relax because the chief is here, so he found a good balance there with show face, show support, build that camaraderie and so on, but then he's out,
Yep. All right. The able to execute extreme ownership while exercising decentralized command.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to beat that one up too much. There was a significant amount of discussion on that earlier in the series. So if you didn't catch that episode, you can go back and see that particular one where we did talk in depth about decentralized command and how that balances against extreme ownership. But here again, it's just about finding the right balance and maintaining it.
Yep. And it's just the one point that I would put on that is that retain ownership even though you push decision making to your junior leaders. And how you retain that ownership is by soliciting honest feedback and ensuring that they're guided as needed, not micromanaged, but guided. And then the last point on the dichotomy of leadership: a good leader has nothing to prove, but everything to prove.
Yeah, that's deep, right? Like
That's the dichotomy within itself. You have
yeah,
nothing to prove, but everything to prove. And I
yeah,
think it's that is the art form in itself. The fact that you're proving something by not trying to be egotistical and not trying to prove anything, but by you just simply doing the work, executing it appropriately, taking ownership of that work. You're proving yourself without
yeah.
proving yourself.
We touched on something before where we said don't talk about it, be about it. Let your actions speak for you, right? I think for me personally, where the way that I've gone about this right here is I got to a point in my both my personal life and my professional life and my career where I no longer felt that I had anything to prove to anybody else. Um, I found a certain level of peace and confidence that I had done enough that I had proven everything that I needed to anybody else, and I stopped worrying about that. That's not to say that I stopped trying. And the the mindset that I adopted was the only person that I have to prove anything to anymore is myself. And so I still continue to try to push myself, hold myself to a high standard, continue to learn and grow as an individual, as a professional, as a leader. And by trying, let me rephrase that, only trying to prove things to myself, I'm proving whatever needs to be proven to those around me.
All right. And just to sum it up, the last point for this entire book: a leader must be calm but not robotic. It is normal and necessary to show emotion. The team must understand that the leader cares about them and their well being, but a leader must control his or her emotions. If not, how can they expect to control anything else? Leaders who lose their temper also lose respect. But at the same time, to never show any sense of anger, sadness, or frustration would make the leader appear void of any emotion at all, a robot. People do not follow robots.
So this concept of having control over your emotions, there's been so much written about this over the years, and when I say over the years, I mean like over centuries. And for anybody listening to this, I'm going to take the long way around as quickly as I can. We've talked about Mattis a couple of times, right? Pretty phenomenal leader in our generation. Um, he talks about not every reader is a leader, but every leader must be a reader. If you're listening to this, I encourage you to uh, be a voracious reader. Get in the habit of even the audiobook stuff. There's so much out there. Um, anyway, I would encourage you to read the Stoics, right? Marcus Aurelius and meditations, things like that. There's some tremendous value uh, in the words of some of the greatest humans that have ever lived, and put their thoughts on paper. And so there's this idea, and it's been expressed by different people over time. I think there's a common thread. There's a fairly well-known Latin phrase, and I don't remember the actual Latin for it, but it says, "He conquers who conquers himself." In other words, if you're able to conquer yourself, if you're able to master yourself, control your emotions, like we're talking about here, you're capable of conquering and mastering anything. Da Vinci had a very similar quote. Basically, there's no greater mastery than mastery of oneself, right? He said one can have no smaller or greater mastery than mastery of thyself. So being deliberate about mastering yourself, knowing yourself, and being able to control your emotions, not be void of emotions, because again, people aren't going to follow a robot, right? But understanding when and how to show that side of yourself and being in control of it, right? Another great one that ties directly to that, Jordan Peterson, some phenomenal stuff that he puts out. His books I really enjoyed. And he talks about something that I think is a really important concept for our profession, and for leaders, especially in our profession, that a a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is one who is capable of great violence, but who has that under voluntary control, right? And we touched on this a few minutes ago, that the unfortunate reality of our profession is that sometimes we are called upon to deal with violence, and sometimes that requires that we be violent in turn. Uh, we must be able to have that under great control. We must be able to exercise restraint, and we must be able to the extent that anyone can expect, and to the extent that that's possible, control our emotions when we're in those critical incidents. Um, as much as it's important in those incidents, it is just as important for leaders to be able to control those emotions and master themselves when they're sitting across the desk from a subordinate that they're frustrated with, or even angry at, and not lose your cool.
The I think it's important to show emotion, and it's potentially showing a vulnerability I've shown before, and it's very emotional when a police officer loses their life, right? I'll never forget at Seal's funeral. I was and I'm in the pipe band, and I play the drums, and I've unfortunately had to attend a number of officer funerals. But where it hits the home the most for me, and possibly selfishly, because I always reflect on my life and my children, is when I see the children, and seeing his son wearing his hat. his badge on his hat, driving the Power Wheels police car. That's just such a real emotional moment. And to not capture that in real time and then reflect on that later with the officers, and to be able to show your emotion, show your vulnerability, show how much that upset you, and then be able to show them it's like, listen, this other stuff that we may or may not have done well, it matters, but what really matters is that we're here to talk about it. And having the wherewithal to reflect when those moments present themselves. And there's nothing positive that came out of Seal's murder. That was detrimental to the entire city of Jersey City, the entire law enforcement community, right? But to not have that conversation and really reflect what it is that we're out here to do, what it is that we're out there to stop, it would be foolish. And especially if you're a very strict leader, and especially if you're somebody who focuses on the law and focuses on doing everything by the letter of the law, to not take those opportunities to have those discussions and not show your human emotion, it's a loss. Um,
Yeah, I
but it ties right into caring about their well-being, right? It's like the reason I care so much about you writing a report thoroughly is because I don't want you to get sued in 2 years. The reason I care so much about you going to the gym during your shift that we're permitted to do, the reason I care is because I don't want you to have a heart attack because see what you guys eat and you honestly eat like shit half of the time. Like,
yeah,
but like get some exercise in, do something to make yourself better. It's like having like you have to be a human being in this profession, and especially
yeah,
the more you become a leader, the more that you're in charge of others, the more important it is. A cop can be selfish. A cop can only care about himself and the calls that he has. The second you step into that leadership role, you have to not only care about the calls, not only care about the community, but you have to care about this squad and the development of 5, 10, 15, 20 people. That's a hell of a burden, and to not recognize the importance of that would be foolish. And the emotional aspect is just so important.
yeah. I Joe was a tough loss for us, and Melvin and Mark Donardo, and there's been so many over the years. Our agency has had a tough go of it, and allowing as a leader, allowing subordinates to see that yeah, this does affect my leaders, and so maybe it's okay that this is affecting me, and I can talk to them, and that's all really important. The flip side of that, recognizing the emotional toll that this job can take and how serious it is and what the stakes are. There's nothing wrong with leaders having a sense of humor, lightening things up once in a while, laughing with your guys, talking to your guys like a human being. Hey, how you doing? How's the family? Things like that. Like, and again, we talked before about how um, you've got to find that balance where you're not so close that anybody becomes more important than another, whatever. That doesn't mean you can't establish relationships and bonds with your people and have human interactions and emotional interactions, even positive ones. And man, there are so many things that we deal with that withdraw from our account emotionally, if you want to look at it that way. We as leaders could do a whole lot more to make deposits into that account for our people emotionally, to bring some positivity to the job, and have a positive impact on the atmosphere and on the individuals as human beings.
Yeah, I have an award from the Hudson County 200 Club. I have a Valor Award. One of the crazier calls I've handled. Um, Very proud moment for me, relatively early in my career. And the same day that I got the Valor Award, it was everybody that was involved in Santiago's murder received awards. His mother was there. She received a bouquet of flowers, and the whole that whole award ceremony revolved around that. And what a truly humbling experience to be part of. Um, about a year after the date of the incident, but to be able to see that community coming together and talking about that incident, seeing the appreciation of the mother of this very young officer that was senselessly murdered and ambushed. Um, and it's humbling, and it's to not involve your peers in that discussion and to not talk to people about these dangers, and also show how we come together as a community. Like, a soldier is killed overseas, it's a big deal. They get military honors, but a police officer is killed within the city, that city shuts down. That is national news. That is the everything comes out because it's such a at-home experience, and it's such a loss to the community. And I encourage that when these events unfortunately happen, and they'll continue to happen, to have those discussions with the people. Um, Even something as simple as having emergency contacts available for you. Like, if one of your officers was injured, and it could be a car accident, like, do you know how to get in touch with their loved ones? Do you know how to get in touch with their spouse? Are you able to send an officer, or if they live far enough away, call up an officer from that jurisdiction, because that speedy response could be the difference of them saying goodbye or not.
Yeah.
That preparation and that difficult conversation is important to have, but it shows
This
that
is something. This is something where, several studies have examined this recently, where we're seeing a mass exodus from uh, across the country. Cops leaving the job, NYPD hemorrhaging people. My agency yesterday, we had I think half a dozen cops left to go to other agencies in one shot. I mean, it's happening all over the place, and in a lot of places, they're not just going to other departments; they're leaving the profession, right? And there's a crisis of recruiting, uh, where as we're hemorrhaging people, we're not able to replace them. It's a major issue, and as they uh, analyze this issue to try to figure out, what can we do about it. One of the things that they're finding is that consistently cops are talking about it's not the the vitriol from the public that's driving them out. It's issues with leadership and the way that they're being treated internally. And in many cases, what they're talking about there, and this goes directly to your point, in many cases, what officers have cited is silence from their leadership and their command. A guy gets involved in a critical incident, whether it be a use of force or whatever. And we're hearing time after time after time, nobody called me. Nobody reached out to me. My chief, my immediate supervisor, they never picked up the phone and said, "Hey, how are you doing? Do you need anything?" You know, and they'll say, "Well, there, it was an ongoing investigation or whatever." Come on, you know, this is the stuff that is driving our people away. This is one of the major failures of leadership within our profession, and every component of this book that we're now at the end of can be tied into that. Um, but you gotta you gotta be a human being, and you gotta treat your people like human beings.
Yeah, I think that's the servant leadership in a nutshell, right? But anything else on this book? Any last minute comments?
Well, I think that's it. I hope I genuinely hope that anybody listening was able to take something of value away from these discussions, and some things that they can put to work in their endeavors as a leader. And I would love to get some feedback if any of the listeners want us to address a concept in more detail, or look at some specific challenges that they faced and talk about maybe how we can apply some of this stuff to those situations, I would love to have those types of conversations. So I look forward to doing more of this.
Yeah. And I think that anybody watching this could see how much we care about the profession. We care about development of leaders and future leaders that aren't even in that position yet. And I think that's the whole mantra of the J. Harris Academy of Police Training. That's what we take pride in is developing and furthering the goals of the individuals that come to us, because the people that come to us for training are motivated to do better for themselves in their profession. And I think the more that that spreads, it'll spread like a cancer. So we're trying on our part. I encourage you guys to come to our in-person classes, not just to get more students at our classes, but the more students in these classes, the better the conversation. And it's the whole dynamic environment of the live feedback from people. It's really powerful, and I think it's a great thing for this organization. We also have our conference coming up in April in Atlantic City, where all of our instructors will be there, and we even have a happy hour that you can join us at. But until next time, we'll be picking up future episodes. But stay safe. Hope you've enjoyed our breakdown of the book Extreme Mode Ownership by Jocko. Thank you, Jocko, for the input and what you've done to put together and spur a lot of our own thinking. But please stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe. Take care.
This podcast is brought to you by the J. Harris Academy of Police Training. J. Harris Academy of Police Training is based in New Jersey and provides law enforcement training services nationwide for promotional examinations, use of force, supervisory development, and other key areas within law enforcement. This podcast is utilized to discuss key topics occurring within the profession. The opinions and information provided is for entertainment purposes only. In an effort to provide this, we often purposely discuss opposite views and opinions to spark conversation and develop discussion points. The contents of the show and show notes are all copyrighted. All blog posts, podcasts, and show notes that are distributed to the public for free can be redistributed via hard copy or electronic copy for free only if the J. Harris Academy of Police Training is included as the acknowledged author within the actual media that is redistributed. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog. Under no circumstances shall the J. Harris Academy of Police Training, any guests, contributors to the podcast or blog, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the company be responsible for damages arising from the use of the information provided.